Hey guys, what is up? Kid here of Burn One with the Shadowverse Evolved channel as always. It's been a while. I've been really busy grinding out for Chicago and working on some other things, so I haven't been uploading recently, but we're going to be back on that grind here, and then we're going to start things off with the deck that I took to Chicago and was able to top it with my team with, which is Angel Control Abyss. I think this deck was pretty undervalued in this whole meta, and I know this deck actually does get somewhat better in the next couple metas, and it gets played a bit in set 5 and a little bit in set 6 as well, because I do believe it gets some extra tools that makes it a little bit more consistent, a little bit better. But with that being said, let's just get into the deck, and I'll kind of talk about how the deck runs and everything, and going into it and why I pick some certain picks, because there are some picks here that I specifically chose for the meta and expecting to see a lot of forests. It's a really spicy pick that I don't think anyone was expecting. Unfortunately, I played almost no forest players that day, so I didn't really get to abuse the tech as much as I wanted to or hoped to do. But yeah, so let's just get right into it. All right, so here's the deck itself. I'm sure a lot of you guys are already seeing the Gourmet Emperor right there as the spicy tech. I've done a deck profile on a similar Angel Control Abyss list before, so if you want more of a breakdown there on those cards and everything, feel free to go back to check out that video. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of assume you kind of understand what the game plan is here, so we'll just kind of go everything very quickly, and then I'll talk about my picks for it and why I chose these cards for the meta. So the hugest game plan for Angel Control Abyss is one of the big payoffs is that you get to play Winged Inversion. This card is really, really good. The problem with this card, though, is that you just don't have a lot of great targets, and it makes you go down a card, essentially, because you basically pay one, discard this card and another card in order to get the main effect, which is you want to usually choose the first effect, which is discard an Angel Follower, select an enemy follower on the field, and destroy it. It's a very cheap way to get rid of standing threats, which is really good. It caught a lot of people off guard because this is a card that no one's really anticipating, especially when you play Abyss, and because Necrocharge Abyss has been so popular lately. Even though I feel like that deck, though it's pretty solid overall, I think it takes too much to get online and doesn't really do enough to really take control of the game. Whereas I think this playing Winged Inversions with the Angel package stuff is really, really powerful. So the best target obviously is Israfil. If you can set up an Israfil before turn 6, you get a Death's Breath Israfil back, and if you have an Evo point or an extra play point on 7, you can Evo it immediately to clear the board. This is one of the main ways you have to win the sword matchup, for example. One of the biggest struggles for this deck is the early game. It's kind of why we play so many snipes and so many things that help us with the early game. Because we need to get to the mid game and later to be able to really take advantage of how powerful this deck is, because usually our game plan here is either we set up an OTK with a Zazel, or we just outvalue our opponent for so much that eventually they can never answer our board anymore due to all the discarding we do and the overstat followers we play in response to whatever they're doing. One of the big things here, we ended up going towards the end. I used to have Demonic Drummer, which was a really spicy card, and it did pretty well, but at the end of the day I felt like it didn't do enough for the game plan of the deck, and we need to be more worried about getting into the later turns. I would totally try Demonic Drummer again if I had more time. One of the bad things about this total Chicago run for me is that I didn't really get as much of hardcore testing on this deck as I wanted to, because originally I was spending a lot of my time playing Haven Craft, so mostly doing different Haven builds, and along with picking up Egg on the side, because I felt like at the last second I'd probably end up switching to Egg for the team just to have a solid matchup into everything. But I ended up deciding to go with this Abyss list at the end. So Angelic Snipe is for that early aggression, so we can stop certain things. A lot of 2 health followers that are standing a lot of times are really annoying, like Tachyon, for example. An unevolved Tachyon is really annoying. A lot of the good cards early game that Sword is playing, for example, have 2 health, so Angelic Snipe for 1 in response to their board is always good. Getting that extra health and clearing things out of the way is always very, very good for you. I think everything else is kind of self-explanatory. Surefire Bullet, we're the control list, right? There's a lot of people who chose, instead of playing horse followers this time around in the forest lists, playing Rose Gardener and things like that, which I came to the same conclusion that Shepard did when in a lot of our playtesting discussions, is that you probably want to be playing the Uma cards instead, because it doesn't get outed by Surefire Bullet, and Surefire Bullet's probably a card a lot of players will be playing as optional removal because it's a neutral card. So Surefire Bullet here to get rid of a lot of the 4-cost followers on Evo, or not 4-cost, for health followers like Alice, which is a card I expected to see a lot of with Egg Haven running around, things like that. Another big thing here, through testing, and I honestly think at the end of the day, Crazy Executioner is such a silly, crazy card. Getting people on curve and just disrupting their curve is like a huge advantage. I think most games you get to play this on 3 or 4 in Evo immediately and rip out like anything that you know you can't really answer very well. I feel like at that point you've probably won the game or set yourself up to get into a position to win the game. By using Crazy Executioner to get cards that you can't out very well out of their hand, things like Leonidas, which is really tough to deal with in this deck. There was a game against Sword where I essentially had to leave all my followers standing for like 4 or 5 turns in a row playing around their Leonidas that they searched out earlier because I wasn't anticipating a mid-range Sword, but as soon as I realized it was mid-range Sword, I was like, please let me like draw into my outs for this. Big outs being obviously which was that's how I outed their Leonidas eventually after I forced them to play it. Otherwise, Crazy Executioner is another great card I was also looking forward to use in that matchup to rip out Leonidas from their hand, because a lot of these mid-range decks don't really play more than 1 Leonidas, like a 1/1 line. Sometimes there's a 2/1 line, but at that point they have to either naturally draw into it or they have to like use another search to get to that Leo. And we still have answers. We have essentially 5 answers to a Leo that hit the board, or sorry, we have 2 answers to Leo hitting the board. Otherwise, Crazy Executioner is a good way to get it out of their hand. A lot of times too in those matchups you kind of have to set up enough pressure on the board that their Leo doesn't really do enough. But the big card here, I'm sure everyone's like, why the hell are you playing this, kid? This card is so garbage. So I have to tell you a story of how this card ended up in the list. Shepard, as you know, one of the testing partners in my group, has been grinding Forest to death. So I played a lot of Forest matches against him, and we kind of came to the same conclusion, like Forest is one of like the top 3 decks for sure, and it should be played on every single team for the most part if they like want to have the highest chances of winning the event as a team. And in a lot of those matchups, there was a day where he was high rolling super hard against me and got like a turn 2 Ancient Elf 5/5 like 5 games in a row, and it like tilted the crap out of me. Well, it didn't really tilt me, like, but it was just annoying, and not having a very good answer to Ancient Elf was killing me a lot of the times. And like no matter what deck I was playing, a 5/5 Ancient Elf was just very backbreaking to deal with, because a lot of times it required you to spin 2 cards they removed, and a lot of times they got at least 5 damage in immediately, which was really annoying to deal with, because you know, a standing 5/5 on turn 2 going into your turn 3, for example, there's not a lot of good cards that can out that. You like the best combination of the cards on 3 is a combination of Surefire Bullet plus Angelic Snipe, and that's 2 cards to get rid of their 1 card, which is quite annoying for you to deal with. Kaiza here was my boy. He was the way to answer that. When we played into the Force matchup, this card destroyed anyone that was like greedy enough to try to go for the 5/5 Ancient Elf, thinking there was no good answer for it on 3. A lot of times in testing, when I play this down, it was pretty backbreaking for Force to deal with, because a lot of their ward potential is kind of behind the Ancient Elf on some of their turns where they go wide and build like an Ancient Elf and a Tia and things like that. Which was great about this card too, is it also helped me deal with other 2-cost followers that would usually come in standing and would be hard to deal with, and you want to get rid of them immediately. So Agnes Tachyon, if I ever hit a Uma matchup, that is a great card to just pop off the board. Playing Kaiza on curve too felt very powerful, because a lot of times, like for example, if you were going first, opponents turn 2, like in Sword, they'll always play like a 2-drop, or sometimes they play 2 1-drops. But Kaiza on 3 meant that we got to answer their 2-drop immediately while creating a threat on the board that they have to deal with, and that is not engaged as well to deal with the followers. So it means they have to use a spell most of the time, or some kind of Evo thing going on to get rid of Kaiza. And so Kaiza usually got in for 3 damage at least, or traded into another follower afterwards, meaning this card was a lot of times 2 for 1, which felt really good. And to get towards the end game, a lot of our early cards either have to 1 for 1 very efficiently, so like we spent less play points to remove their follower, or it has to create scenarios where you can go for 2 for 1 or even 3 for 1. That's why, like for example, we're playing Soul Dealer, because a lot of times this card is a 3 for 1. Even though if you just go neutral on the healing, it's still going to be a 3 for 1 a lot of the times. So Kai'Sa was like pretty cracked for the deck. Though, if I knew that day I was going to basically play no forest matchups, I probably would have dropped this card. I just kind of teched very heavily for the forest matchup, assuming there'd be a lot of forest players. And oddly enough, we didn't really hit a lot of forest players in our run into top 8. So unfortunately, this tech didn't get a like pop off as much as I liked, but it was very, very solid. I think at the end of the day, though, like you probably only want to run this as a 2 of, not a 3 of like me. The 2 of would have been pretty solid. 3 probably messed up here by playing it at 3. We probably could use that extra deck space for something else, like maybe a 3rd Soul Dealer or something, or even a 3rd Erd. Yeah, and then so because we're going with that game plan where we're trying to, you know, out-resource our opponent, we got some Dark Alices here to abuse, and a lot of times too, with how our hand size dwindles down, Dark Alice is still a very, very powerful card because if we have no cards in our hand, when we use its banish effect to bring it back, we don't have to discard a card because we have no cards to discard. So she's just a threat that also not only removes something on the board, but removes a card in their hand. So a lot of time, Dark Alice is like a 3-for-1 itself, because on attack we're going to make them discard something before they can even respond against Dark Alice. So if they only have 1 card in hand, they essentially have 0 cards in hand dealing with Dark Alice. And because it has rush immediately, that means a lot of the times on curve we're like answering some big threat. The Dark Alice usually lives with like 1 to 2 health a lot of the times, and if they do somehow to like run another card into it, we can just banish 10 cards from our deck to bring it back as a threat that I have to continue to deal with and continue to lose cards every time it attacks. I really like Dark Alice as a card itself. It's like one of my favorite, like I guess like control threats, I would say, for Abyss, because it does everything we want it to do. It's a big body. It is basically almost a win condition in itself because it's super hard to remove, because we can just choose to banish 10 cards anytime to bring it back and then discard a card from our hand if we have cards in our hand still. And then it also, you know, like I said, removes a card from our opponent's hand, limiting their options as time goes on. And so if their deck doesn't generate a lot of card advantage over and over again, Dark Alice can just kind of take control of the game itself, especially the fact that, you know, we're playing Dark Angel Olivia. A lot of times on 5, there are plays where I come into play, we draw a card, discard a card, or if we know next turn we're going to bring back Death's Breath and we went first, on 5, I'll discard a card, I have my opponent discard a card, and I'll gain an Evo point. So on 6, I can Death's Breath back Israfil to Evo it immediately to answer their huge board. That's one of the ways we deal with when Sword makes us go first in some cases. If they decide they like the Evo points more or the extra card, this is kind of how we set up the turn 6, destroy their board, and they kind of lose the game from there, because now we have a 10-10 ward on the board that also cleared like usually 3 to 5 cards on the board with 1 swing. Outside of that, though, you know, one of the big things about Kai'Sa too is, like, you know, they gain 3 health, but that's not a big deal because a lot of the times we don't care about our opponent's health total. We only care about their resource total. So if they have limited resources, Zeyzal can just like reset their health to 10 if we just let them heal too much or something like that. Things like Into Dragon, for example, if they like Shenlong Evo and we heal them a couple times with the Kai'Sa, we can just kind of ignore the health, because at some point we're going to drop a Zeyzal and set their health to 10. Because I mean, Azazel is such a powerful card to like put so much pressure. Some games I've done like 15 plus damage basically using Azazel's Evo on like sword, or not sword, sorry, dragon and things like that, and like some Haven decks as well. But yeah, this list overall was very, very solid. In testing, it did very well. This deck is not perfect for sure. There are some changes that probably need to be done, especially if you're going to just take this into a local meta. If you don't see a lot of force in your local meta, obviously drop Gorman Emperor. Even though I think he did a lot of work in my testing, he didn't do much work the day of. He was still like a pretty solid 3-drop on curve, especially going first a lot of the times, which is really, really good. But outside of that, we just kind of use this deck to, like I said, we control the match flow, try to limit their resources or remove resources by just forcing the discards, and then kind of outvalue our opponent with such big followers that are overstated for what they are, and then just kind of take over the game that way. A lot of times, if you get a Death's Breath back in Israfil and they just can't answer it, they just kind of lose the game on the spot. Same thing with Dark Alice. There's not many banish effects running around right now, so Dark Alice is really hard to remove. Dark Alice comes back a lot. In some matches up, I've just brought it back like twice just to destroy their hand, along with destroying like 3 cards off of their board, which felt really, really good. Their hand goes to 0, their board goes to 0, and you sit there with Dark Alice that's threatening them over and over every turn when they have no answers to really do anything with the card. But yeah, this is the list I took. Made top 8 with my team there. I had Dean and Shepard there. Dean was on his Uma control list along with Shepard on Elephant Forest, as always. But yeah, if you're interested in this list, I think you should check it out, play test it a little bit, move things around a bit, and figure out what exactly you like. One of the big things though is Winged Inversion is a card that just people get blindsided by sometimes. In the top 8 match too, like every time I played this card, everyone had to read the card. I played this against the Dragon player that ended up winning the entire event with the Shadowverse dude. Their team ended up taking it. We actually ended up playing them the first round top 8. Ramp Dragon is normally a matchup that you should have very, very good win rates into. Unfortunately, that day I just like drew no real wards after like turn 2, so they got to forte me twice, which put too much pressure on me to really win the game. But there were turns with like they play Shenlong, Evo Shenlong, and like left it standing, and then on my turn I was just like, yeah, winged inversion to kill Shenlong, then play my like threats onto the board. Unfortunately though, like I said, they got 2 fortes to my face before I could really do anything to like slow them down, essentially. Unlucky on my part, but you know, it is what it is. Congratulations to them as always though. They did a phenomenal job. Shadowverse being a pretty solid content creator along with a player as well. It was always fun meeting him in Texas as well as Chicago this time around. But yeah, with that being said, guys, try this list out if you've been thinking about, Angel Control Abyss at all, especially going into set 5. This deck gets a little bit better because we get some more neutral tools that really pump up the deck, along with some new Abyss cards that act as removal and also discard for your opponent, which is really good. So look out for Angel Control basically becoming more of a real deck in future sets coming into set 5 and a bit into set 6 as well. With that being said though, if you guys like this, like, comment, subscribe, and all that. We're back on that content grind, so we should be releasing a few more videos this week and should be hopefully continuing our online tournament along with more videos every week. If you guys have any video suggestions, feel free to hit us up, let us know in the comments, hit us up on Discord or whatever. We're always, have a lot of fun talking with everyone in the community and the people who watch our content. So with that being said, later guys, we'll see you in the next video.